the recording. Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Faisal Ketkodia. I am with MUSA, the Movement for United South Africa, and I'll be chairing the session today. We've got quite a lineup of business people and participants with us. I hope this is going to be an interactive session that will be beneficial to everyone. Just some ground rules. Because it's an online session, there could be some disturbances, so please be patient if there is a network problem or if there's any kind of disturbance. And please also be considerate to the speakers. When they do have a disconnect or communication issue, let's allow them some time to connect and continue. Anyone may participate. It's an open session. While we have a panel discussion later on as per the schedule that you see on your screen in a minute. The participants in the panel will be our guests, and you'll get a quick brief introduction of each one of them, as you can see on the screen, as Yusuf will outline in a few minutes aspects of this program and what MUSA does. But briefly, let me say that MUSA is an organization that works towards aggregating, bringing together communities from different pockets across South Africa, aggregating the common work. So we hope to try and align a lot of the work, the good work that we all believe in, that we all want to see happen, whether it's in assistance to the needy and those in poverty, or whether it's in enabling business, or whether it's in alignment of faith groups on common aspects of our faiths. And we know that every faith group does actually promote goodness. And that's why we need to align on those aspects of goodness. We've had several sessions already. In case you don't know, MUSA has been active since the COVID days, every Saturday at 2 p.m. on sessions for over 2 years without fail. And subsequently, with Karuna coming on and taking on chair lady of MUSA, as a chairperson, she's also encouraged the idea of quarterly sessions for programs like these. We've had the Religious Forum of Religious Leaders, and that was just the beginning of it. There'll be many more. Just like we're having a forum now for business people, beginning of it, there'll be many more. And all aimed to empower, encourage, and collaborate for a better South Africa, which is what MUSA's purpose is. Key fundamentals is ethics, morality, selflessness in leadership is what we're trying to push forward more and more. Selfless leadership is there. It's keeping the balance, but we find a lot of selfless people holding back and not partaking, and we want to encourage those selfless leaders to come forth and partake. So I look forward to the session, as I'm sure many of you would be also looking forward to the discussions and participating, not just in this session, but subsequently as well. The question that's been put to all of you is, how can business make a difference to South Africa? So without further ado, let me call on Yusuf Patel, who's also one of the founding members of MUSA, to commence the session with an introduction of the speakers and the program for today. Thank you. Yusuf, over to you. Is Yusuf mute?
Thank you,
There you go.
Faisal. Greetings and I think good morning to everyone, and welcome to everyone that has joined the session, and welcome especially to our panelists. We really have a group of very experienced leaders, business leaders, and I think people that have also been involved in business development, in enterprise development, and have been involved in already, you know, making a difference in terms of building entrepreneurship and ensuring that there's an impact in the country. So it's really great to have everyone on board. I think as Faisal said, this is part of our Elections 2024 series, and we were focusing on different sectors. The idea being that we're having these discussions, whilst in the context of the 2024 elections, but also looking at how different sectors view the country, the challenges, the vision, and within the sectors, despite whatever opportunities or constraints there may be in the country, we're looking at how different sectors are able to actually still drive change and look at within their own kind of realm of control, how they best can actually improve things and make a difference. So I think that's really the broad context. And it's really great to have, we've got Donald Khumalo, Alon Reis, and Mthunzi Ndwaba. And as you can see from their profiles, they've all been extensively involved in the business area. Donald is a successful award-winning interior designer and really, we would say, a self-made business person. So he understands, from scratch how to set up a business, make it successful, and really make a significant impact. So a lot of his work is making an impact across the continent, and he's really regarded in the industry as a leading member within the interior design fraternity. And it's really great to have Donald on board. Alon as well is really, I think everybody sees him quite often on television, regarded both locally and globally as a pioneer and maverick in the business incubation industry. So Alon as well has been, practically involved in looking at building businesses, and he's obviously also written a lot about it, speaks a lot about it in South Africa and internationally. And then Mthunzi Ndwaba is also a business person, regards himself as a serial entrepreneur, and he's chair of Productivity South Africa and co-founder of Tuja Holdings, which is an innovative and disruptive employment creation company. So really great to have everyone on board, and looking forward to an interesting conversation. We're trying to focus the discussion as well around how can business really drive transformative values and change. So if we look at the context of a socio-economic justice and sustainable development paradigm, and Musa's work is really within that realm to see how we can promote and advance socio-economic justice. And I think business development, skills, entrepreneurship is one of the critical ways in which we can start leveling the playing field in South Africa and move things forward. But we're also trying to look at how we can encourage new economic paradigms, new business paradigms, so that we can drive and see how business can drive transformative values and change in the country. And we're looking at also the economy in a broader sense, about in terms of how does the economy actually assist and help societal well-being, upliftment, and dignity, and how do we promote selfless, ethical, and capable leadership across society. And then I think an important element as well is how do we begin to look at the relations between the business, state, trade unions, and civil society, and reimagine some of these relationships so that collectively, because I don't think any particular sector, it's all interdependent, and how can we drive things collectively, and ultimately also looking at how can we really unite the country. We do have a lot of divisiveness. How are we able to unite more and more? And overall, I think the purpose of these discussions as well is we trying to see if we can improve or drive a business networking. So within the business sector, how do we drive networking and support as well between established and new businesses, or startups, or young people looking to either enter the employment market, or to look at setting up their own businesses. Our last session we had on the youth, and obviously that's the big challenge for us as the country, in terms of the level of youth unemployment, and the fact that the large proportion of the country, we say in half of South Africa's population is actually under the age of 30, and 70% of working age people in this group are unemployed. So that is part of our big challenge, and I think we're looking at how can we promote discussion and ideas. There are a lot of programs, etc., running in the country at different levels, but we're just trying to add and see how we can contribute further. And that could be, one of the useful outcomes of this particular session. So the broader concept of inequality and unemployment and low wages in the country, I think, is part of the broader challenge. But really, we believe that as a sector, the business sector by itself could drive, significant change. And I think we're looking forward to listening to some of the inputs based on the experience of the panelists. The program, I think, is quite straightforward. We will give each of the panelists, an opportunity, 12 to 15 minutes, I think, just to make your sort of key inputs in terms of addressing some of the questions about how the business sector can drive social impact, how can the business sector contribute to a skills revolution, and broadly, what are the challenges faced and the vision for the country. So we'll maybe just do it in that order. Donald, Alon, and then Tunzi. And then I think we then will have a panelist engagement, I think an inter-panel sort of discussion and ideas, and then we'll open it up more broadly for further questions and responses. And then Faisal will then sum it all up and close the session. So that's probably the program. Yeah, thank you very much, Faisal.
Thanks, Yusuf. I think you made some very important points there, which I'm sure the panel would have picked up, and hopefully all of the participants here today. The partnership and the networking between civil society, NGOs, trade unions, our youth, the women who are so often so marginalized, emerging. I think these are important aspects that we need to consider. Looking forward to all three speakers' views, and addressing how we can partner better, how we can achieve more for South Africa. So without further delay, let's start with Donald. Looking forward to your views, each one of you. Over to you, Donald.
All right. Good morning, and thank you so much for having me here. Thank you so much for having me here. First of all, I must say that it's quite a daunting task to be regarded as a business person, because I don't often, or I'd never thought of myself as such. I thought of myself more as a creative, and business was something that happened to me. I just happened to, at some point, decide that I want to stay, and I'm glad that business has decided to keep me. I've been running my business for 10 years now, and I must say, through the peaks and the troughs, I've learned quite a bit around how it is I can manage myself better. I have been able to also, at the same time, embody certain values. When I look back, I think with today's topic, we are really talking about values. And values are quite important because it helps to define us. I also believe that we need a mission and we need a goal. And part of creating jobs has been to define those missions and those goals for myself. And I realized that the job creation became a byproduct of having defined what it is I stood for. How can business contribute towards skills creation and a revolution? My day-to-day business practice means we are inherently creating jobs. Our mission is to create spaces for people to truly be themselves because our work is interior design. So we go into people's homes and we help transform their homes. What I realize is as we transform people's homes, there's always an internal transformation that happens within me, where I realize where all these moving parts are part of, or all these gears are part of my story and my narrative. I see the wallpaper installer, somebody who perhaps does not even have a matric coming in and earning a significant amount of money. I see the plumber, I see the electrician, and that gives me a sense of purpose in my work. I see not only this transformation happening to the spaces, the transformations are happening in these people's lives, and the transformation is happening within me. I believe that every space has a story to tell because every human being has a story to tell. And it's up to me to help my clients tell that story. And after being in business for 10 years, I realized that people want to hear my story. And that's what I want to share with you today. My mission is to create a business that is of value and that aspires for longevity and continuity. As a designer, first and foremost, I think of myself as a personality-led business. What does that mean? It means that Donald and his values inform the values of the business. And unfortunately, when people get to know you as the personality of a business, the head of that business, so Donald Nomalo Interior Design, when Donald dies, I've always been afraid that my business will die with me and whatever I've created plummets with me and all those jobs that I've created goes away with me. And so in ensuring longevity, I've had to also travel to different parts of the world and interview businesses where they started with a founder and along the line, the founder passed away and even 10 years down the line, the business is still standing. That's what I want. Because I grew up in South Africa, I know what unemployment does. It breeds all sorts of violences. It breeds all sorts of inequalities. I've always wanted my business to stand, and I'm actively working to ensure that after I leave this earth, or God remembers me, that my business will still stand. I found over the years that I needed to define my values. And my values I have quite clearly defined. I believe in collaboration. I believe in accountability. I believe in authenticity. I believe in quality. And I believe in innovation. Because of these values, I believe the work has also embodied the quality, the innovation, and the sense of authenticity. And I've won many awards. And one of them, like the best awards I've ever received was the Andrew Martin Interior Designer. It's a collection of 100 of the top world's interior designers. And just to be in that book and to be the only African in that book has been quite, at the same time, humbling, but also something that I think needs change. But it's an award that is quite prestigious, and the Andrew Martin Design Awards is really the Oscars of interior designs. I believe that my values have also been formed by my early life. I was brought up in a family that heroed education. So that's my father on the left. My father was perpetually at UNISA. Every single time you wanted to find my father, he would be at the dining room table studying. And that meant that my mother would take care, like in many families, of the household duties. But what I learned from the both of them has been quite remarkable because from my mother, I got this sense of using leverage and being able to stretch the rand. that would become beneficial to me as a designer in terms of growing the business and being able to take 5 Rand and making it look like 50 Rand. So like any mother in a house, she would need to take 5 Rand, make it look like 50 Rand, and 50 Rand, make it look like 500 Rand. This could be in meals, in clothes, in the decor of the house. You have to take whatever you have and multiply it, or at least give the impression of multiplying it. But what I learned from her was you can be given something small, and how you treat it, you are able to multiply it and make it really big. My mother would take 50 Rand, make it look like 500, 500, make it look like 5,000. I don't think that my mother even had 5,000 Rand at any given time, but let me tell you, if she had 5,000 Rand, I'm sure we would have been living in a place that looked like it was designed for 500,000 Rand. So from my father, I got the sense that education was very important and university was very important. Being able to articulate yourself was very important, and being able to communicate was equally important. And for my mother, the sense of family and creating spaces that people wanted to linger longer with. They also loved furniture. And so I also got the idea that furniture was meant to unite people. You can see me and my 3 brothers and my mother on one sofa. That's what furniture and design does. We create havens for people. We
2 more
create
minutes,
stories.
Donald. Sorry to
Sorry?
interrupt you. 2 more minutes, yeah?
2 more minutes. Okay. I'll hurry it along then. So I started my business when one of my lecturers said to me that he had a project for me. At this point, I could not pay for my university fees. And so what I did was I started working for all the shops in Sunnyside. I would approach a shop and say, can I do some painting for you? Can I design a logo for you? Can I design some furniture pieces for you? And surprisingly, most of them agreed. And so years down the line, I was able to eventually enter a reality show, and I won it. What that taught me was the power of visibility, which I advocate for. I think that people need to be more visible. But what it also did was, I think it's a challenge for South Africa's proximity. Entrepreneurs need proximity to their goals, proximity to power players, and proximity to mentors. I was able to also set up my own office, which led me to create to be in close proximity with my clientele. What I also want to talk about is why I do what I do. I design it for joy. I design, and when I design, my aim is to create joy in people's spaces. I believe that we need to communicate quite clearly what our values are, and we need to communicate them consistently, clearly, and repetitively so that people buy into our vision as creatives. I believe that collaboration between our suppliers, our clientele, and the workforce is what drives the quality. So it's also about impacting or imparting knowledge in order for it to continue and to move forward. I believe in accountability. I believe that we need to have ethical businesses that stand for quality, that are fair, and that pay people fairly. I believe in authenticity. Authenticity means the authenticity or the quality of my relationships is one thing I hold dearly. It means that the clients that I have, I want to continue to have them in perpetuity, well, as far as I can, but also the suppliers to pay them for the quality of the work that I do. I also believe that we need to communicate in a quality way, to present our work in a quality, in a cohesive kind of way. Innovation, we need to use the resources available to us, such as the Instagrams, the Twitter, TikTok, whatever it is, to advertise ourselves and not wait on people to speak about us. I also believe in compliance. The banks and all other financial institutions will require us to have our story straight. And so it's up to us to take radical accountability in order to produce the documents that they want when we need the help. For me, luxury is in the unspoken details. It's in the quality of our relationship, and it's in the way we're able to harness relationships and move it forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Donald. That was very, very interesting and inspiring to see young people succeed and do what you've done. It's really phenomenal. I think your values, after the mission and vision that you talked about, phenomenal. It's something that every business needs to adopt. Collaboration, quality, innovation, communication. These are fundamental aspects for successful business. Thank you for sharing with us. we will hopefully have some interesting discussions later on about some of these values and how you achieved it. We, as Musa, have a couple of things on our social media groups right at the top, which mention things like partnerships with government to ensure minimal interest, 0% interest for businesses, which is something that we want as a value as a nation to move towards 0% interest. We also have been promoting for a long time in those social media aspects the need for partnership and ownership, equity in business. So people who work for you become partners in your business. And when you talked about longevity or continuity of business, that's one of the things to consider. And hopefully that will also come up in further discussions. How your workers, I mean, we've changed from the slavery of the last century, where workers were actually almost slaves of organizations. But today, workers are part of an organization, and every organization talks about the value of their organization being its people. So if people can become shareholders and have equity in the organizations, I think that's phenomenal. And hopefully that will be discussed further. So thank you, Donald. We now go on to Alan. Alan, many of the people may have seen Alan on television and Business Day. A lot of interesting coverage there. And hopefully the recordings that we're doing now for all these series of Musa sessions, what we normally do is we have the recordings shared quite widely. So besides all the people partaking here, thousands of others will receive it across social media platforms and hopefully benefit from it. So over to you, Alan. Let's hear what you've got to say.
Thank you, Faisal. And thanks, Karuna, for the invitation. I'm not going to do a presentation. I'm just going to try and talk to some of the topics that have been put forward for today. You know, Donald said it in his presentation. He said the consequence of putting a business together was that there was employment and there was money came as a result of that. And I'm, as has been mentioned, a big advocate of entrepreneurship in South Africa. I have been for, sure, 24, 25 years now. Through Raise Corp, we've had 15,000 different businesses graduate through incubation programs. Right now, we're looking after about 500 businesses, and we go beyond South Africa into Tanzania, Mozambique, Namibia, Uganda, and various other African countries as well. So I want to talk about a few things today, and I want to start off by talking about the fact that entrepreneurship or business is a social good. For me, I think what's very important is that we understand that the basis of all business is solving a problem. That if there is a problem, business comes to solve that problem because a problem manifests in a market, and a business is created in order to serve a market at a profit so that it can expand and can grow and employ and create wealth and generational wealth and longevity and all those wonderful things. And as part of growing as an organization, as a business, we become part of the fabric of that society. So if anyone, when I was once, many years ago, nominated as Social Entrepreneur of the Year, and I declined the nomination because I said, I'm not a social entrepreneur. I'm a for-profit business. And they said, no, you are a social entrepreneur. And I said, no, I'm not. And we had this whole, I would say, discussion or argument about it. And eventually I came to realize that their view was that if there was a problem solved by an organization, therefore it was a social good. And therefore entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial development is a social good. So anyone here who, in my opinion, who starts a business and successfully builds a business is fulfilling a social good. You're employing, you're creating wealth, you're creating process, you're creating that longevity that Donald spoke about, etc. So what is the problem in South Africa right now, and not just South Africa, across many economies? The problem is that many entrepreneurs, the failure rate amongst entrepreneurship is 96%. 96% of businesses that start do not see 10 years, most don't see 2 years. And when you look at that stat even further, you see that 90% of the 96% just give up. They wake up one morning and they say, I can't do it anymore. They do not persist, they do not push through. So what that means, and just let me explain that stat a little bit further. They are not put into liquidation, they just give up. And what is it about giving up as an entrepreneur? How do we prevent entrepreneurs from giving up? So I'm going to just jump a little bit into a different story, which is meeting a Professor Diane Francis, who's a Canadian working in America at the World Economic Forum. And she talks about her work is done on the difference between shame-based societies and fear-based societies. Shame-based societies make failing shameful. Fear-based societies make failing fearful. So I fear to fail versus I'm ashamed to fail. And as a Canadian, working in America, she found this very distinct difference between the culture in Canada versus the culture in America around failure, business failure. In America, you know, we have that very cliched story about, you know, I failed and I go to, or I haven't failed and I go to the venture capitalist and I say, please back me. And the venture capitalist says, son, have you failed? And you say, no. And he says, go fail 3 times and then come back to me. It is seen as a learning curve. Part of your journey as an entrepreneur is to fail. In shame-based societies, you come to the venture capitalist and you say to them, I failed. And they go, oh, shame, that's terrible. That's shameful. And then, well, you're obviously not such a good entrepreneur, such a good businessman.
The UN Secretary General's Special Representative in Haiti.
Somebody's got their, all right, thank you. So, so to me, the whole idea here in South Africa is to think about what we are. Are we a shame-based society or are we a fear-based society? And as part of the so-called Commonwealth, you can hear in much of our language, oh, shame, man, oh, shame. Shame. We are very much a shame-based society. And a big part of the work that we have to do is to normalize failure in the entrepreneurial journey as part of the journey to become a successful business person. That as long as we have the ability to learn from our failure and have the superstructure and the people around us to pick us up and then put us back into the driving seat, then we can learn from that failure and use that failure in a positive way. So I think the issue right now is that shame-based society has become structural in the sense that if you fail as a business person, let's say, for example, during COVID times, you failed during COVID times. You were a brilliant business person. COVID happened and then you failed. And then you get blacklisted by the banks. It's very hard to come back into that system again once you've been blacklisted by the banking system. We have to find another mechanism to support entrepreneurs who failed for let's call it all the right reasons, not all the wrong reasons. And then support those entrepreneurs that failed for all the wrong reasons to learn from that and then come back into society as entrepreneurs. The more entrepreneurs we have in society, the more we can build the economy, the more we can build society. But there's another side to that. Another side to that is what I call CERTI, compelling economic right to exist. When I see many entrepreneurs who come in after what I call these weekend special courses, where you go on a course, you know, you go this business in a box story where you come on a Saturday morning, you go on an entrepreneurship course, and then on Sunday you finish the course and you're a so-called entrepreneur. That's not entrepreneurial development. That's not how one builds entrepreneurs, by putting them on a 2-day course and then expecting them on Sunday to be an entrepreneur, and then providing them with a brick making machine or some other thing where you've put them into a business, and now you say we've created so many entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs need what we call a compelling economic right to exist. Do they have something to sell? Do they have the ability to sell it? Do they have the desire to sell it? Is there a market that will buy it? And if they sell it, will they make a profit? If those things aren't in place, it doesn't matter how many weekends we send this entrepreneur onto a course. If they don't have a compelling economic right to exist, then we are wasting our time. And too much of the focus of entrepreneurial development is not focused on that compelling economic right to exist. It's focused on just going through a course and getting through a course in a week or a weekend or a 6-week period, and then I deem you to be an entrepreneur. And then we ask the question, why is there such a high failure rate? The last thing maybe I want to put out there, just to be controversial, is the fact that we've glamorized entrepreneurship way too much. I think in a weird way, our government's done too good a job in terms of glamorizing entrepreneurship, because what I see often is the entrepreneurs who are just entering the entrepreneurial fray are expecting it to be easy, that they're going to have this business plan, and then they're going to go get funding, and the business plan says they're going to make lots of money in year 3, that J curve, and then they're going to make lots of money, and then they're going to employ lots of people, drive fancy cars, and it's all going to be easy. And the problem is that if you expect entrepreneurship to be easy, and it's not, it also contributes to giving up as part of that journey. So for me, I think what's very important is that we are very, very sober in terms of how we communicate the entrepreneurial journey, that we ensure that entrepreneurs are aware that the level of sacrifice from a personal perspective, from a family perspective, from a health perspective, there's a huge amount of sacrifice in order to build a successful business. And if they're not prepared to put in that sacrifice combined with that compelling economic right to exist, then they're probably going to be one of those 96%. But let me end on a positive note. If we cherish the 4%, we cherish the ones that have gone through, we cherish those, and then ensure that they become bigger and at scale, and we support those businesses, we support the likes of Donald to become national and across the African continent and into Europe. If we support those kinds of businesses to become global businesses, then we have truly become an entrepreneurial nation. If you look at the other nations that have been very good at building entrepreneurs, they globalize their entrepreneurs.
2 minutes.
And South Africa, I think, has done a really terrible job in terms of globalizing. And so I leave this challenge to everyone, is how do we take the good entrepreneurs and how do we globalize those entrepreneurs? I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan. That was phenomenal. And having gone through 15,000 businesses, clearly your experience, your inputs and your advice there is phenomenal. It's something that we all need to look at quite carefully. And particularly the points you mentioned around the mechanisms to back, alternative mechanism to back entrepreneurs from being blacklisted by the banks, and ways of uplifting them rather than allowing them to give up. Rather, as an alternative, we should be encouraging them and pushing a little bit further to get them to the next level. Alon, there were several points you mentioned. I'm not going to go into the details of or repeat some of them, but I hope that they're going to come up again. in terms of the market, profitability of a business, what everyone looks at in terms of a successful business. We need to pick up on those points and discuss the how in a bit more detail, and hopefully that also will come up in subsequent discussions and the panel discussions that will follow. So once again, thank you very much, Alan. We'll now go on to our next panel speaker before we get into the open discussion. And that's Mr. Mutunzi. Welcome, sir. Appreciate your presence. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your having me as well. Good morning to everybody. It's good that I've listened to everybody really from the start, so that we can understand what the objectives are that we want to meet for Musa. Having listened to Donald and having listened to Alan, I've tried to then make sure that I skip some of the areas that I felt that already dealt with. So I'm going to focus on making sure that I give a little bit of a different coverage. And in the discussion, then perhaps one can come back and find ways of dealing with that. I think in dealing with what are the challenges faced by the business sector and the vision for the country, I decided that let me first give some kind of a context, corrections really, as well, so that we are all on the same page. For starters, I like to describe myself as a rural boy, because I'm very proudly rural, with my mother still being in the village of my birth, Colville Herschel in the Eastern Cape. I'm an endurance sportsman, which I take very seriously, business activist, and I'm a father of 4 and the grandfather of 2. Technically, in terms of the CV that's been provided, I'm not the Productivity South Africa chair, having been removed by the Minister of the Department of Employment and Labor due to some wars that some people can pick up on YouTube. You can find that on my, I think, TikTok page and everywhere else. So I'm going to skip that. I am, though, currently the chairman of the South African Norwegian Association, and that's very important for me because it's a partnered organization together with the Norwegians. And on our board, we've got, amongst others, a representative of the No Fund, which is the largest sovereign funder in the world, one of the most successful, really. I am, as the CV says, the chief advocate and lobbyist for the UDM, but I think more specifically, very important, the Gauteng premier candidate for the UDM. And for me, I'm also happy to report that in a business discussion hosted a few days ago, we won and we got 50%, with the ruling party getting 24%. And that's very significant because it shows the kind of change that people are ready for, the kind of hunger for something different. And I think from a contextual point of view as well, before I delve into the different areas that I think are important for us to go into, whilst I'm a serial entrepreneur, I am particularly proud that my team and I built a company called Talk IT from about 2002 to 2009, thereabouts, a world-class beta in high technical training solutions. And in 27 countries, we built this company. We won Cisco Partner of the Year every year for 7 years in a row. We won Microsoft Partner of the Year twice in 5 years. And in about 2006, I think it was, I was IT Personality of the Year. 2009, I was the Black Businessman of the Year twice in 1 year from competing companies. But more significantly, I see myself as a strategist and as a turnaround specialist of businesses and organizations. Partly lived in San Francisco during the global financial crisis in 2009 to turn around a company called M Squared, and did so successfully. I think also it is important to pick up from the CV that was given that, you know, since 1920, when in 2017, I became the leader of all employers in the world in the International Organization of Employers based in Switzerland, I was the first African to do so since 1920. The IOE represents over 150 business organizations. And I was then the spokesperson from 2017 till 2021 of over 50 million companies all over the world, and really lived in an aeroplane for a very long time, where I was visiting about 30 countries a year to try and effect change, one of them being Qatar. We had to be part of a team that prepared Qatar for the World Cup. If we hadn't gone to Qatar to fix the employment environment, to fix the issues with the kafala system and everything, which I personally handled, we wouldn't have been able to have a very successful World Cup as we did in Qatar. But by becoming the leader of all employers in the world, I also became the first African to be the vice chairman of the International Labour Organization, which is a specialized agency of the United Nations family, made up of 187 countries, and also chaired all the employers in the world in the United Nations Business and Human Rights. I think it's also significant to mention, I shall be publishing a book later via the University of Johannesburg, maybe in the next 3 weeks or so, as a very ILO simplified, non-technical, non-complex coffee table book and so on. Chaired the University of the Western Cape Council from 2015 to 2018, very significant from an educational point of view, but also chaired all the employer programs at the ILO Turin Center in Turin, in Torino, in Italy. And lastly, I think it's important also to mention for all of you that I was the representative for the country at the Business 20 of the G20 countries from 2009 to 2021, and became the co-chair of the German and Italian education and employment committees. Now, I've shared that very quickly as a very big summary that's all over the place for the first 5 minutes of chatting, because I think it will give context. When you talk business and you talk organizations and you talk education, it will give a context as to why I feel so strongly about some of the points, including the very points that were mentioned by Donald. I also ran the music industry, by the way, Donald. So for me, creatives are a big thing. And I have kids who are creatives as well. So I think the creative environment is an amazing one that we need to harness as well to be able to fix issues that relate even to the shame and fear-based societies that Alon was talking to, because we need to build pride. And these are now some of the challenges, is how do we have pride in who we are? How do we believe in who we are as a people before we become business people? Because we have, as business people, have to be very connected to the communities we are, the people we live with, and therefore you cannot separate our role from our environments. I think that for me is very, very critical. So when you talk about innovation, for example, and creativity, you can't be fully immersed in innovation and supporting innovative people in our country, as well as entrepreneurs, when in fact you do not believe and you work in this, what Alon talked about as this shame and fear-based societies. We need to be very cognizant that we cannot build sustainability when we don't pay attention to productivity. Our country does not pay attention to productivity. We need to have productivity being part of the cradle to the grave. If you can have productivity as cradle to the grave concepts, we'll do much, much better as a country. It will even take away the issue of ministers and government and trade unions wanting increases that financially are not linked to how productive we are. I think for me, that is problematic. It's highly, highly problematic that we've created a society that expects more money. But from a business point of view, we know there is no way, if you are not productive, if you're not making profit, if you are not sustainable, that you can be able to sustain the kind of situation that we always want these increases all the time. But by the same token, it means we cannot sustain our economy. So what is the point then? How can we be sustainable, good business people when we're not building and we don't have job-rich growth as well? Competitiveness and productivity are related, really, because if you don't embrace total factor productivity, you are likely to have competitiveness issues. South Africa, some of us may be aware, alongside being the highest unemployment destination in the world, the highest in terms of the inequality coefficient rate in the world, we also are becoming one of the most non-competitive from measured countries. About 11 years, 12 years ago, we were number 44. out of 61 countries. Now, in terms of the Institute for Management Development Global Competitiveness Index, we are sitting at 61 out of 63 countries, and we think we could be the number 62 or 63 if Russia and Ukraine were not fighting, because then they are not included in the measurement. I'm not going to go into the entrepreneurship because it's been covered, but it has been eroding for years. And we keep telling people that you cannot have entrepreneurship being eroded and have innovation not being funded and supported and enabled and expect to grow our businesses and expect to grow our country. I think for me, it's very trite that if you don't have entrepreneurship being supported and you don't have enterprises being supported, you can't have sustainable and resilient enterprises, and therefore cannot have a resilient and sustainable economy. I mean, it just follows, like day follows night, really. The other challenge that we have is that we have complete disdain for each other. We don't respect each other as South Africans, as Africans. We don't respect each other. And I think it's part of a very colonialist kind of attitudinal problem, which is why for me, it's also important for us to bring our creative environment, to bring our cultural heritage to the fore in its complexity, because we're a very complex country that is made up of so much in it, you know, with Greeks and Italians and Jewish people and the Muslim community and the Africans, and everything in it makes us who we are. It makes us an amazing society. It makes us a very diverse and beautiful place to be in. But we need to believe in ourselves. We need to believe in each other. We need to work collectively with each other without having this disdain and disrespect for each other. There's no focus, you know, on what we can do together, on what we can do well as a developing country. For me, I believe that South Africa can lead the world. I want to repeat that. South Africa can lead the world. Why do I say this? Everywhere I've gone, and I've been very blessed, as I've said, to have gone to over half the world, you find respect for our business acumen, you find respect for our ethics, you find respect for the way we conjure and put things together, but we don't have respect for each other here at home. And everybody thinks we can lead, and we have the ingredients for doing so, for inspiring people. But we just need to believe and believe in each other. And, you know, I also believe we don't have leaders at the moment. And I think, and we should stop bending about using the leadership principles and saying we have leaders, because if you look at our historical situation, even in business, the majority of businesses that are in the 30 to 35% of our economy are white-owned businesses that were there by virtue of what they did pre-94. So some of them have inherited things all along. They haven't really had to lead anything. Yes, they've had to manage. It's a big difference. They've had to manage their family businesses. They haven't had to lead nobody, right? So we are not cultivating new leadership. We're not working on new leadership. There's no support for new emerging businesses. As you were listening, our infrastructure is problematic and low-hanging fruit, you know, potholes on our roads, leaking pipes for water, you know, things that can be maintained and fixed. And then we can work with the other things in the medium to the long term. I saw in Musa's objectives, you also talk about institutions, you know, and as soon as I saw how you talk about the importance of institutions, I thought, you know, if you follow the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, SDG number 16 talks about peace, peaceful environment and social justice, which can only be realized through an environment where we build our institutions. And you must remember that the SDGs work on the basis of working together. So you can't have SDG 16 without having, for example, SDG 1 on no poverty, SDG 2 on zero hunger, SDG 3 on health, SDG 4 on quality education, SDG 5, gender inequality, SDG 7, affordable energy, SDG 8 being the most important for us as business is economic activity and decent work. Very, very critical. And we can talk about those later because I think I've got now 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes. So I want to wrap up. I found in a debate, the debate that I say we won 2 days ago against the ruling party as the UDM, I listened to 5 political parties, leaders of 5 political parties. Not one of them talked about productivity. Not one of them talked about the informal sector and the township Kasi economy. And that makes up 65% of the South African economy. That's got to be crazy. So we have a huge potential in that 65%. We have a huge potential in how do we not just transition people from the informal sector to the formal sector, but how do we in the informal sector find a way to enable, identify the people there so that we've got very effective social security for our people, very effective participation in the tax base for our people. And we need to, of course, manage illegality in immigration. That's absolutely, absolutely key. We cannot create employment when not making it possible for enterprises to be created and for them to be sustainable, as I said. And we cannot hope to fix inequality. And so lastly, for me, we need to find coherence in our foreign policy. South Africa is known as the most incoherent country when it comes to foreign policy. And yet we expect to bring foreign direct investment in our country, and even foreign direct investment, one that must come without being prioritized over our local internal issues. We must be the masters of our own destiny. I want to stop there, and I can elaborate in the conversation because I think my 15 minutes is up.
Thank you so much, Mthunzi. It was an excellent 15 minutes that you took up. Every sentence, as fast as you spoke, I tried to absorb, and I must say it was phenomenal. I didn't realize the extent of leadership and experience that you had. I often talk about my trips to New Zealand, the Middle East, the US, and other places, but yours is even more extensive and really something commendable. I think that we can all network and leverage on. So I'll pick up more with you personally later on, particularly on the Qatar aspects, but in terms of what you said about believing in ourselves and respecting ourselves, those are fundamental aspects that I think we need to adopt. And as Musa, we try to promote that as well, to get more and more participation, encouragement, fulfillment, and picking up on those that we that want to give up, as Alan was mentioning earlier on. These are key things that we need to consider. And you also touched on some of the things Donald touched on, which is phenomenal. I think the linkages and common thinking that we all have, and I'm sure, Alan, you're probably experiencing with all the business incubators and business people that are getting into entrepreneurial activities, a similar kind of common vision or common challenges. So I'm quite interested to have us all pick up on some of these in the panel discussions. I noticed also that you're part of the UDM and a leader in many clear aspects, so that's interesting. We have a couple of other participants I see from those present who are also from other parties. I see a member from the Sun Party, Sizwe Umma Nation, Hidayatullah. I'd like to give him also an opportunity to maybe say a few words, because Sun has been promoting, like some of the other parties, a strong agenda on economic transformation. Economic transformation is key. So let's do that. Let's try and give people on the panel, on the group, an opportunity to raise their hands and say a few words, and then over to the panel to comment on some of the discussions we've had.
Faisal, sorry, Faisal, could I suggest that before we do that, can we have the panel to respond to each other? Because it's been quite a bit of things said. You've got people with very different experiences here. And the economy is a very complex issue in our country, and the challenges are very great. So it might be nice just to pick up on some key points. I think because you want to look at what can be done in future and what business needs to do, and how we can assist as Musa, could we perhaps have some conversation amongst the panelists?
Sure, we will do. We've got quite a bit of time now. I want to give people an interactive opportunity to raise their hands. If they have any comments to make or points to make, you can raise your hand now or speak up, and then I'm going to hand over to the panelists. So you've got 5 seconds to raise your hand or speak up. 4, 3, 2, there we go. Ashraf Garda. Welcome, Ashraf. Great to have you on board. You got a minute to express some of your comments. You have extensive experience. One of our intentions is to have you and a whole lot of media panelists also partaking in some of the discussions, but go ahead, take the opportunity, Ashraf.
Thanks, Faisal. Let me say upfront that I have the privilege of knowing Alon Reyes pretty well over the many years, and I have the privilege of knowing Prof. Mthunzi Mdwaba particularly well. As we know, we've had many conversations in person, over coffee, on air, off air. So I certainly know what they think, right? So two things. Maybe one to Alon. I think Alon, you made the point about our businesses we're not truly entrepreneurial if we don't go global. And I think it's an interesting point because, for example, we in South Africa now, I'm sitting using an Apple phone and have an affinity with Apple, and I've got nothing to do with that country, and yet they've been able to expose themselves to me, and I cotton on to who they are. So the big question to you, Alon, is how then do we actively ensure that South African companies truly become global? And I'll say before you answer, I've also been in a Proudly SA platform speaking about buying local, or local is lekker. And I've argued slightly against that, saying, in fact, that, we need to build local, but sell global. So I think we're on the same track on that one there. And then to Mthunzi, well, best wishes with your role at the UDM. And I'll ask you two things in one go. Considering your extensive, and I mean, many may not know, as he's mentioned, his experience on multilateralism is absolutely phenomenal globally, right? And your business experience, Mthunzi, how do you then see your role in the political space, right, with the UDM, and then linking that to your vast business network and your important point that you've brought up, considering where you were at Proudly SA, at Productivity SA, to put productivity at the very center of our national agenda, something you and I have spoken about on many occasions. Okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ashraf. I hope the panelists will bring that into the conversations that Karuna spoke about that you're all going to have. Abu Karolia, please go ahead. 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. I thought it was amazing in the way the business, I would say, cogs took the conversation to a level, the question that I want to put forward to you. The conceptual views, the kind of highlighted views internationally, but I want to also talk about localizing the idea of an economy, that we find that in our townships, many of the people that are traders are actually from outside the country. They're not really locals. In fact, I find that our ordinary people actually are finding it difficult to make a living. And there isn't that kind of training camp out there, I think, in my mind, like what happens in China, where you have home industries, where businesses are involved in developing home industries so that they can do well in their businesses. At the same time, the local idea of their countries are also prospering so that eventually they can open up their own businesses. The kind of training that at some point or the other, I think there were certain foundations that approached us to say, how can we train people to deal with basic understandings of business so that eventually we develop a culture as a system? Now, you must remember that needs education, support, as well as funding. So what do you guys have to say, especially Professor Mthunzi or Alon or even Donald, and especially those that have got experience in developing startup businesses and training startup businesses? Shouldn't business people that are successful start training people at the level of what you people are talking about, conceptual and localized sales, so that we can develop an international forum? It'll take 10, 20 years, but at least we'll have a foundation for that. What do you guys have to say as a system? We can't talk about moral, ethical value and just write it down as a line. We need an impact system that is based on the fact that we all become involved in this kind of system. That means the entire system in the country relates to making people prosperous, having integrity, and removing poverty and unemployment in that fashion. Please, can you guys comment on this? Thank you.
Thank you, Abu. Brother leader, I don't see your actual name, so I'm not going to risk assuming who it is. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, everyone. It's Tahir.
Yes, Tahir.
Thank you very much for the presentation, quite enlightening. And as I was listening, I like listening to business people because I'm a unionist, and generally we have competing interests between those who are in business or who are business aspirant and what is in the best interest of those that we represent as workers. And we've seen over the years that, you know, business people, you are quite trained and eloquent to create these beautiful narratives about business and what business can do to develop countries and so forth and so forth. However, we cannot take away the fact that businesses inherently, in many instances, are exploitative, and they are profit driven at the expense of the workers, and in many instances at the expense of countries where they make those businesses. We see it with the things like the mining sectors and all those kinds of things. The damage that these companies do and just pack up and leave at the expense of the country and its people. Now, when we talk about ethics, ethics it's a word that everybody uses. I mean, every Tom, Dick, and Harry who is as corrupt as they come, they will tell you about ethics, and they will be able to articulate ethics in such a manner that you will think that there's something wrong with you. But in reality, we know that whatever that we are going through in this country, it's in the main due to unethical conduct by both those who are in government and those that are in business. Because of the workers, yes, I must say that one of the things that are problematic is to equate productivity and what we usually demand as workers. And it's a problem that we're dealing with, but it's because of those competing interests. Now, my question to all of you is that how do we then make sure that we merge our competing interests for the purpose of advancing what is in the best interest of the country? Because there's no way that this country economically is going to move forward so long as those competing interests are in existence. And how do we then make sure that we hold one another accountable within the framework of respect and what is in the best interest of the country? Because the country is going to the dogs, and it's going to the dogs because of we are participants, both business, unions, and government in what is happening in the country. So how do we then make sure that people like Donald, who are entrepreneurs, who are coming to business, are not exploiting those that work under them? Because of majority of the so-called tenderpreneurs, they are the most exploitative human beings that you can come across. How do we hold those such people accountable to make sure that whatever that they are making is not for them to be able to just drive Ferraris and have a good life, but they also look after the employees that are under their care?
Wow,
Thank you.
Tahir. Thank you, Tahir. Loaded questions there. Lots of valid, interesting points to pick up on. We also have Stefan. Please go ahead, Stefan.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So usually when these conversations are held, it usually takes the perspective of South African business on an international scale, right? And I think that it's always very important for us to first also add the township economies in South Africa, because that's where the workforce for most South African businesses comes from. So now, what becomes the relationship between these South African businesses and these townships where majority of the workforce comes from? And what benefit do these businesses, or them being, so for example, Steve mentioned about how they should be internationally competitive, right? Now, being internationally competitive, what upliftment, what benefit can give to these township economies? That also, because now most of these employees, most of the workforce, their salaries are spent in the townships, but now there is no upliftment in the township. So how can then business contribute to the upliftment of the living conditions of their workforce, which is then the relationship between the business and supporting township economies? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions, Stefan, Tahir, Ashraf, and Abu. Over to you, panelists. There's a lot to cover, a lot of good points to be made. Who would like to go first? Shall we start with Mthunzi?
I'm happy to start. Sorry, the gentleman after, was it what? Ashmuk? I didn't get the name.
The first one was Ashraf, then it was Abu, then it was Tahir, and then it was Stefan.
Abu. Okay, it's Abu. I didn't hear Abu. I didn't hear that it was Abu that was speaking. I just wanted to make sure that I'm responding to the right people. So yeah, quite a number of questions. Let's start with Ashraf. I can't seem to run away from Ashraf Gada. He's always there, no matter where I go. So and he's a dear friend. I think let me just declare that. So Ashraf has got an organization or a big drive about Champion South Africa, which I think is also important because for me, it speaks to the respect that I was talking about and the believing in who we are and in each other and the togetherness, because you can't possibly do anything without championing who you are first and who and what your country is and being proud of that. But the question he asks about the experience in multilateralism and the business network, you will have heard that I mentioned very quickly that we need to have some coherence insofar as our international policies are concerned, because we're known to be one of the most incoherent countries. And for me, what is important is that, you know, some of the people we send to the multilateral environment, the United Nations to be specific, are people who get there and then get very excitable. And I want to use that word, excitable. And excitable because they are sitting in Europe somewhere. And remember, I mentioned also the colonialist background that we have. So when you go to the United Nations, there is this thing that you don't even realize how excited you are that now you are accepted by the people who consider, who are sort of the standard to what the world should be, right? And for me, I think that's a big problem in itself. And that's why they don't like people like me, because when you get there and you want to be pro-African and you are pro where you come from, and you make only examples that come from your environment, they don't like that. And it's important to know who you are and remember your roots when you go to those platforms, because you need to know that the majority of these people speak from both sides of the mouth. They are huge hypocrites who will prioritize the United States of America. United States of America and the United Nations pushes and forces everybody to do things, but they don't do them themselves. For example, you know, South Africa is the highest ratifier of conventions, one of the top in the world. And the US doesn't ratify anything, nothing. It just forces everybody, but they will not be part of the very standard. So we need to be alive to the fact that when you are there in the multilateral environment, you must think of South Africa. Think about what does local business in South Africa need? What does South Africa as a community require? Not
So
what the European...
Abu's point, Mthunzi, well, one of the things he mentioned was about education and funding of it. Funding for
I'm dealing with Ashraf. I'm dealing with Ashraf first. I haven't got to Abu.
Okay, you've only got 30 seconds more. I'll give all the other.
Or if I've got 30 seconds to answer all.
Let me give you a minute, and each of the panelists will have 3 minutes, like yourself, to respond to some of the questions. But if you want to have further conversations on the points that the panelists have made, then you can add another 2 minutes to that.
So let me get the rules. So I don't respond to all the questions that were posed to me.
Yeah, you can. I mean, I've listed 14 questions. Right, so I'm not expecting you to respond to all 14, but whichever ones you want to, and we can, at the end of it, address those that we haven't addressed.
Okay.
The other panelists haven't picked them up. So
Okay,
you've already addressed some of Abu's questions and some of Ashraf's questions. There was one on funding, which I know you talked about, in terms of some of the funding, which you call no-fund funding. So maybe you can pick up on that, but you've got another minute. Go for it.
Okay, so we need to find a way to have our developmental financial institutions, for example, be funders of first resort, not funders of last resort. You'll know that the IDC and the NEF and CEDA will only fund you if somebody else is funding you. That's absolute rubbish. They need to fund you first. That is the principle in a developmental state and being able to fund our people. When you talk about the businesses and the training, which I think was Abu's point, is absolutely correct. We need to have that training, but at the same time, it needs to be aligned to Convention 131 on minimum wages so that our people are not exploited, as Tahir was saying. But that also means that from a cultural systemic point of view, we need to have, for example, an employment policy, which South Africa doesn't have. We need to have an industrial policy, which South Africa doesn't have. We need to have a future of work, artificial intelligence policy, which South Africa doesn't have. We need to have all those things to be able to build a culture of understanding as to how we are going to build each other. In terms of Tahir and ethics, he's absolutely correct. You know, we look at the King Code as the code. That's also rubbish. I'm sorry. It's a very Western Eurocentric kind of code that has no regard from traditionalism, that has no regard for our local needs, that has no regard for human capital development. For example, why in his code does he only uplift finance, but not human resources and human capital development, so that people are at the center of what we do? When you talk about retrenchments in this country, Section 189, I don't know if colleagues know it, you simply give notice to the CCMA, but you don't give notice to Productivity South Africa. And more often than not, you find that they are inefficient operational inefficiencies at the height of the company at the top, without people in the middle given an opportunity for intervention. I'm going to stop there because I think that's my minute.
Yeah. You covered quite a bit, and I think very interesting points as well, and challenges that we face in terms of policies. And I like the fact that you're picking up on technology, because technology is a major enabler, and we can leapfrog with technology into a lot of things that could benefit South Africa and become global as well as local, in a kind of a global scenario for the benefit of everyone. So that would be a very powerful thing for small business and our entrepreneurs. Let me now go on to Donald. Donald, you have 3 minutes to respond to any of the questions you feel comfortable to respond to.
Okay, so I think, you know, I do identify as a small business. So I did take my business from being like 250,000 to over 40 million rand turnover. And so in doing that, I realized that I needed to go back to where I came from. I went back to the township, and you know, those ladies who make curtains in the township, that's who I went back to. And I went back to their workrooms, and I would basically give them work. Some of the challenges that they had was, once a project went over a certain amount or a certain threshold, they needed to be VAT registered. Now, how do you say to our Mavis, how do you have a conversation about that to her? And those were conversations that my office had to start having with them in order to be able to facilitate bigger transactions with them. Some of the work that we do is cross-border work. So we do a lot of work in Zambia, Nairobi, Lagos, and Abuja. And so we needed to also have certificates that, you know, so that we can clear the border. So it was about sitting down with every single one of my suppliers and saying, the game has changed. We're no longer doing small work. If you wanted more work, bigger capacity, we need a certain document. So that's why I spoke about accountability, as well as, just accountability. It's around having your documents and your paperwork up to date, even if you are from a township. We're having conversations about thinking like big business in order to be big business. But for me, a huge driving force was going back to where the business started, because these women were the women that taught me what design was. And so going back to them and empowering them is something that I hold quite dearly, close to my heart. I'll speak about a guy called Sipho. Sipho is a carpenter, but he also makes curtains. Now, Sipho has, he's gone from working from a township workroom to owning a house that he then has people who are in his employ, over 10 people, just making curtains. It's also meant that because he was then established, I could also refer him to other designers who were able to use him. And I now see him with Bucky's, and I see him with this house, and it makes me proud. So although I don't have a big, in terms of story to tell around unions and all of this, on a very micro level, I see how my business has made a change and an impact in people's lives. I also like what Alan said about how we've glamorized entrepreneurship. Well, because for me, it's the day-to-day, and that reality is not very glamorous. It's the electricity going off, and suddenly you have to buy a generator, install solar panels. That means that your cost of sales goes higher. who now gets to bear that cost? Is the client. And then suddenly the bill is double. What are we doing about that? It's actually, quite frankly, embarrassing. Alan also spoke about globalizing talents like ours. I was on a Zoom call from my house. The electricity went off. The client was in London, but they have a house in Zambia. So I'm doing their Zambian house, and I'm also doing a house for them in London. The electricity goes off. I drive to my office, but because we're on the same grid, the Vodacom, whatever, you know how you speak to somebody and the network is unstable. Quite frankly, it's embarrassing. And the day-to-day reality of us entrepreneurs is not how it's described in terms of this big glamorous thing, how the government communicates it. It's highly embarrassing. It is frustrating. And what we need is stability. We need stability of the power grid. We need stability of the water. We need stability.
What about the view of on equity? As a small business, do you see that as a possibility with your, with your partners, with your workers, with the ladies or the curtaining people? Do you see that as a possibility as a small business to bring them as shareholders having equity in the business?
We do about 4 homes in a month, so we are able to see how giving them consistent works makes a change in their lives. So that's my idea of equity, is guaranteeing. I'm saying to you, I will give you X amount of projects, provided you can produce it. However, when somebody runs out of power, it becomes very hard to rely on them, because as a client, and they are my suppliers, I need some measure of predictability. We are finding that more and more and more, and Mthunzi spoke about that. I think we're going to hell in a basket here, is that we are unable to give our clients, from my end, assurities that a certain project will be done on time, because my suppliers are unable to even give me or commit to a timeline. We don't know if we're in stage 6, stage 4, stage 3, or back to stage 6. So they're unable to ascertain what time my products will be back to me. So I think that we need to take very seriously, and the government needs to take very seriously, the ability to stabilize the power grid, give us water, because even if you're working with 20 people or more, if there is no water, those people need to go home, because we don't want to have a cholera outbreak. So it's all these small things, like a leaking tap, or leaking tap is actually quite generous. No tap with no water. That's actually what's happening.
Thank you, Donald.
And so it stops productivity. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your input and responses there, and the reality that we're all facing in terms of our businesses, our professional work, even our homes, the struggle with water and power, which is a great impediment, which clearly government and everyone, in fact, entrepreneurs need to find a way in partnership with the different stakeholders to come up with solutions and not just depend on government. Let's go over to Alan. Alan, you might have some interesting responses as well to some of the questions. Please go ahead and answer those that you feel comfortable to, and then we'll address the others in the discussion.
Thanks. I'll start off with Ashraf's question around supporting internationalism. So I'm involved in a business in the US, which is a company that brings goods from France and Spain and Italy into America. The French, the Italian, the Spanish chambers of commerce, even the local ones from the regions within France and Italy, have completely participated in ensuring that the French goods, the Italian goods, the Spanish goods find their way into the American market. They're clamoring over themselves to support those businesses into the American market. You don't have the same kind of clamoring happening for South Africans trying to get their goods into other markets. Yeah, I see it in the way that the organization, the local businesses organization, organize themselves to ensure that export is the highest priority. And we all know the benefit for businesses that export. It's Forex, it's jobs, it's all sorts of other things. And I'm glad that Donald spoke before me, because I spoke about the fact that small business in of itself is a social good. You see that as he's built his business from 250 to 40 million, how many other people benefit as a result of that? And maybe Tahir might argue that he's exploiting some of them. I would argue he's not exploiting anyone. He's building a business with longevity and supporting many other businesses. To answer Tahir's question around how do we find each other around this and make sure we don't exploit, I'm involved in the ICT sector, and if anyone has worked with developers now, you'll know that developers are the most unexploited people in the world right now. They run between job and job because they are highly skilled, highly sought after. So to me, the clue there is skills. When you have highly skilled people who are in an international market, it's hard to exploit highly skilled people. So if we're going to ensure that we don't exploit people, we need to make sure that the focus is on building a skilled population that, to Mthunzi's point, is productive, a highly productive, skilled environment. And that is a very complex thing. It's easy to say, but far more complex to do. To Abu's point around the training of entrepreneurs, there are literally thousands. You cannot throw a stone without hitting somebody who does entrepreneurial training. You throw a stone at me, I'm one of those people. I train thousands of people, but we get 50 to 100 applications to join Race Corp every day. 1 in 20 will get in, because not every person who thinks they're an entrepreneur is an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs precipitate at different points in their life. And when you have a mindset that everyone is entrepreneurial, it's problematic. It's structurally problematic. If you look at most economies and you look at the percentage of economies globally, where the percentage of the economy is entrepreneurial, it's between 1.5% and 4% of the economy of the population, of the working population, is entrepreneurial. You can't force somebody to become entrepreneurial. And so just by saying now you go on a course, you're an entrepreneur, is problematic. It creates unattainable expectations. So I'm not saying don't provide the skills, in other words, the financial literacy. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the idea is that entrepreneurs precipitate at different points, and this is a long conversation in itself. And it's the government's role is to make sure that when they precipitate, that they are there to support them at that point. And I'll stop there.
That's very insightful, Alan. Again, with the person that's experiencing a lot of this in the kind of work you do, 1 out of 20 get entrepreneurial acceptance. That's quite a number, small number in my view. And only 1 to 4% who are really entrepreneurial. That actually, for me, is a point of education, because I just felt that perhaps with skills and education, more and more will increase. In our community, in the so-called Asian and Indian communities, we encourage from a young age to think entrepreneurially and get into business. It's almost like in our blood. And I think that kind of a cultural aspect exists in other communities as well. We know that in the Jewish community and some of the other communities which have some great innovations and insights. Amongst Asians, it's a habit, to be active and to be part of things. And I think there was a good point that Mthunzi made about the belief and the pride we're going to have in us. And he mentioned something that you mentioned, Alan, which takes us into the conversations between the three of you before we open for more questions on the next round of questions. He mentioned the importance of productivity and competitiveness, which relates to what you said, Alan, where you saw the Italians and the Spanish and others, vying for the markets, trying to get more of the market share. And we as South Africans need to get the market share. I don't know if it was Donald or Mthunzi that mentioned we can actually be leaders in South Africa, leading the world in many aspects, because we've got such a rich history and such a diverse rainbow nation, such richness in all our different communities. And being through the struggles we've been through, we can do so much. So there's a phenomenal benefit that we can derive. And with Donald's sharing of the experiences he's had and the kind of things we struggle with in South Africa, which are taken for granted in most of Europe, like power and water and other aspects of automated support from the stakeholders like government, academia, civil society, and so on. There is a lot to discuss. So let me put it over to the three of you to pick up on some of the points that you've made with each other in your conversations with all of us, also related to some of the questions that the participants have raised. I've mentioned a few. If you want to, please go ahead and start the discussion between yourselves before I go on to a round of next questions. Let's start with Kunzi again.
Sorry, Faisal, I just wanted to make a point and I can't put my hand up.
Okay.
Unfortunately. I think this point about the global value chains that we link to in South Africa, if we look carefully, the only global chain that we're really involved in is the automotive value chain. You know, where we produce goods in South Africa that's exported. Now, if we come to the points that a lot of our participants have been making about the township economy, I think that value chain going back to what people do in the townships is just not in place. For example, in most of the townships, you have people who are doing car repairs. They repairing exhausts. They're pretty good at panel beating, and we do have a right to choice that has been agreed to, but that is not taken through. The value chain is not, the backward linkage is just not made fully. And I think the creative industries is one industry where, as Tunzi has raised, we can actually really get involved in the global value chains very effectively. And if we look at, say, what Donald is telling us he's doing, they're very simple skills that are involved in painting, in wallpapering, in curtain making, in all the things that you add value to. And so I think the point is that we're not focusing our economy in the right way. If you look at all other countries, they actually focus the economy in a particular way very effectively, and that's where we're failing. We want to be everything to everybody, and we're not focusing on what is really needed to bring everybody into the economy and make it inclusive. Thank you, Faisal.
Thank you, Karuna. That's very, very useful input there, because it relates to what Donald was talking about, and Donald's living proof about the importance of creativity, having goals and a mission, and also what Mthunzi was talking about in terms of our own belief in ourselves and our pride to make things happen. And it touches on many of the things that Alan spoke about. So I'm going to give the three panelists an opportunity to pick up on some of these points. Abu, I noticed your hand up. I'm going to be asking everyone to raise their hands just after I give 2 minutes to each of the panelists. If you can hold on with that.
Sure.
Go ahead, Alan. 2 minutes.
And just to respond to what everyone said.
Yeah, and particularly what Karuna's point was in terms of focus, in terms of what we see in the automotive industry, what's happening in the townships, and leveraging the creativity that we can in our country.
Okay, before I start with Karuna, I just want to respond to your comment about the Asian community, etc. If you look at globally, if you look at entrepreneurial development globally, all minorities in every society are generally much higher, have much higher levels of entrepreneurial activity than majorities. That doesn't matter where you go in the world, minorities tend to have a higher percentage of entrepreneurial activity, and that's got a function of access.
On that point,
yes,
minorities in South Africa, someone argues, if you look at our 11 languages and our 11 communities now, multiple NGOs of communities specializing in different things, and our different ethnicities. If you take the Xhosas and you take the Mbeles and you take the Sothos and you take the Indians and you take the Chinese and you take the white community, the Portuguese community within them, and so on, aren't we all minorities?
I don't know. I'll leave that to the politicians to answer. I'm just giving you the facts as I know them. Okay, so I just wanted to comment on that. That's just a global phenomenon. Then to Karuna's point, I completely agree. And if I think about Donald, I'm loving having Donald in this conversation, because Donald is such a great example of the fact that the township economy is involved in export. They are exporting their curtains, their labor, their creativity into another countries via Donald. Donald is the spearhead of that, and we need to have 10,000 Donalds and the source of the production, the creativity can be from the townships, where it's rich with that talent and that skill. And so when you start to connect it in that way, you see how much potential we do. And I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Alan. I noticed there was also a hand up by someone by the name of Reddy, if I think I saw it correctly. So we'll get to you. Let me move over to Donald now. So Donald, you got 2 minutes. Please go ahead.
Okay, you know, it's quite interesting, because every country where I've done work, there's always somebody who wants to give me a working visa there in order to upskill the people in that country. And whether it's a wallpaper person or a curtain person, you see the readiness and the willingness for some of these countries. Like Mthunzi says, like people love us and they respect us, and they love our creativity, and they love the essence of who we are. And I think as a designer, I've become somewhat of a diplomat in that response, representing South Africa on a global stage. I'll tell you a story about just a simple wallpaper person. You'll say 300 Rand is what you would pay to install a roll of wallpaper. And in every room, you would need 3 rolls. So 300 times 3, that's 900 Rand. If you times that by 4, that's 3,600. That's what somebody who does not need an education, who needs a bucket and some water, can earn per day. But we're not talking about that. So in my business, I have made sure that wherever we go, we are upskilling the people. Sometimes we fly over with our wallpaper people and they come back with a lot of money. And so I often, I'm amazed at how the government speaks about entrepreneurship at such a high level that people don't understand that the wallpaper guy is an entrepreneur. You just need to get yourself to the client's house with a bucket. And I'm sure the client has water and you can work. And in a day, 3.6, if you work every day, which is very possible to work every day, you could earn 36,000 Rand. That's more than what the government will ever give you. So I think my approach to these conversations is always very individual and at a very small level, but I can see how an idea like this can be compounded to create something major and something big. And it's only when I was in Zambia that I realized this, when they actually mentioned it to me. We did a house and it was an 8-bedroom. 3 rolls of wallpaper per room. So you do the maths. So it's very important that, and these are people in the township that, you know, you don't need an education. You just need some basic numeracy skills to calculate some rolls of wallpaper, as well as some numeracy and literacy skills to send your invoice. That's it.
Thank you, Donald.
It's actually not that difficult. Yeah, thank you.
So your point is so important, because we often make excuses and we want government to do this and that, but you're right, there are simple things we can do. And sometimes even complex combination of simple things together in what some of you mentioned as collaboration. I think you mentioned it, Donald. You know, it's one of the values. So, yep, thank you very much for that input. Over to you, Mthunzi, 2 minutes.
Yes, I think I want to start where Donald ended. I think the point really he's making, I'm hoping we're hearing, is that we need more enablement and more empowerment from our government. You know, we don't want them to do stuff. I mean, I remember Cyril making a very crazy statement that, you know, it's not for the government to create jobs. I don't even want to get into that. But the point, though, is that you need to create an enabling environment for our people to be able to do what they can do. We have the talent, we have the people, we have the young people. We've got the demographic challenge in the world, 70% of our youth, as opposed to aging populations everywhere else. I mean, I want to also mention that, for example, one of the things I did not say to Ashraf's question earlier on is that, remember, as somebody who was involved with 187 countries, I know every CEO in 187 business organizations, from Bangladesh to Colombia, from Guatemala to India, wherever. So these are the relationships we need to milk. Why not? You know, we have people who've been there. We can do this. They trust us because we've worked with them. But when you talk also about, and I want to just congratulate Donald as well on his growth and his perseverance and his passion, and really it can, this from a training point of view, we need to use examples like this, not talk about theory, people who don't know what they are talking about, because most of our guys don't even know what they don't know, right? All they need to do is to trim down their egos and work with people like that, and we can do things. When you talk about the creative industries, as Karona was saying, I don't know if people know, Amapiano in the music industry, Amapiano as a genre within the music industry is now exploding throughout the world. But do you know how this happened? Back in the 90s, we fought for local content. I was running the music industry at the time. Everybody was saying nobody wants to listen to local music industry, but there was nothing to listen to because we were not exposing it, right? From there, we got BOM, we got Mapiano and many others parts of it. And if you look at the Copyright Act at the moment and the Performers' Rights Act, which are very flawed by our government, by the way, they are not protecting our creatives. We need to find a way where we don't have clauses like fair use. What is fair use when somebody owns a copyright, right, as a creative? And also we have all these fashion people all over the world copying our animal prints and copying all kinds of things because we're not protected. And to also what Karona was saying, we are being steamrolled in other people's global value chains, not our own. We have no control. So if you look, for example, at hemp, can we imagine what we could do with hemp as Africans? Can you imagine what we could do with the proteas that we export in the world? Can you imagine what we can do with sage? There's so many things where we can create our own value chains. In the US, they go gaga over sage. I don't know what we call impepo. Don't know if other people know, you know, this thing that you cleanse your homes with. They love impepo. They think it's the best thing after cow's milk, right? But we just need to be able to do it and infuse it and be the ones who are in charge. I think that's my 2 minutes. Lastly, I am the chairman, I didn't mention, of a company called Kasi Connect and the advisory board, where we take people in Kasi economy, in the township economy, expose them to each other, do business with each other, provide a global platform that is AI, artificial intelligence operated and whatever, to make sure that businesses like Donald's are known all over the world to what Alon was saying earlier in terms of going into this global entrepreneurship kind of model and whatever. So I stop there.
Fantastic. Thank you for that input. Really, really useful. Okay, I'm going to take some of the hands that were raised, and we'll try and take as many questions as possible for the three panelists to respond to. And because we're having an interactive discussions, if someone else wants to respond to a question or challenge or an issue that's raised, please feel free to raise your hand. So we'll go to Abu, and then PS Reddy, and then Brother Leader. Go for it, Abu.
Thank you very much, Chair, and to all the panelists. I think this question came from Zaid Karolia, which he put up on the message. He said, and I think Professor Mthunzi did deal with it very slightly, but I would like to ask the question to all the panelists. Do the panelists think that the government has the mindset to be involved in business? And I want to just juxtapose my view on this, is that they also have state-owned enterprises, almost some 900 of them. And, you know, most of them are running at a loss. And there's always a very strain on the economy as well as on labor and as well as on employment. And as well as the fiscal discipline, how this all involves in terms of how government play. We haven't talked much about this in this particular setup, and I think we should. In the private sector, the motivation is profit and entrepreneurship and to do well in terms of an economy that's impact in creating jobs and employment and reducing poverty. So what is the motivation for government? Can social responsibility or political control match the profitability as incentive to be successful at business? And what can government do more in order to create these opportunities for business, as well as the role that they need to play in terms of being moral and ethical as making these things available for everybody so that we have a better country and a better economy? Thank you.
Thank you, Abu. PS Reddy, please go ahead with your question. I saw your hand up before.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah, I do apologize. About 99.9% of the time, I normally use my laptop. I think this is one of the rare occasions that I'm using my phone. So I'm still trying to acclimatize myself with the different mechanisms there. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you're looking at the word sustainability, it's a buzzword today as we move forward. Now, a matter of concern to me is, if you're looking at the South African economy, looking at the business community, the question that arises is, how sustainable are our businessmen, our business persons? How sustainable is our economy in terms of moving into the future? And a matter of concern for me is if you're looking at the way tenders are issued and so on. And what I see happening in front of me is that somebody gets a tender, you get a big tender, the first thing you do is you go and buy a Range Rover. You get what I mean? Now, the question that arises is, are we creating a sustainable business person? Will this person get this tender, and on completion of this, will he be able to get job contracts elsewhere in terms of moving into the future, becoming more sustainable? Furthermore, is this person who has been given the contract, is he creating decent jobs where you're providing people with pension and medical aid and all of that? I mean, to me, this is quite important as we dish out tenders. In other words, trying to create business people who are sustainable, who are there for the long run, and also contributing towards a sustainable economy. Because what I see around me is just crassy public consumption. I mean, somebody is successful for about 10, 15 years, and then after that, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you for your question and the points you've made. Tahir, please go ahead.
Abu, please consider my hand up.
Yes, noted.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and really, I must commend Musa for these discussions. I think they are very important for the development of our country. What I want to ask, and maybe in a form of an opinion, because it looks like we all know where the problems are, and we've been articulating all these problems, and we keep on having these discussions about the problems that this country have, and it's all about leadership. And I agree with Mthunzi 100% that we have a lot of people in office, but we don't have leaders. Now, South Africa is filled with talented people, but what I have as a gripe is the fact that, the people that we put into these political offices, for instance, that we are crying about now, are the worst among us. We don't tend to take the cream among us to lead, so that when we speak to them about these kinds of things, they will be able to understand. I mean, a person like Thulas Nxesi will not have a clue whether he's coming or going when coming to these in-depth discussions that we are having now. But it is us who have created that environment where we take the worst among us and we pick them into political offices. Now, my question is, those of you who are in business, Alon, Mthunzi, you have networks, you have influences and all that. You guys are the ones who are funding these political parties. You are the ones who are feeding this pig to continue to do the mess that they are doing. How can we make sure that business, before the funding is given to these political parties, you have conditions for these fundings? You have conditions, the caliber of people that should be in political office. The mere fact that the person started a party and he calls him a president doesn't make that person a president material. But we continue taking the money that we take from ordinary South Africans through business, and we feed it to these people to destroy this country. So we are capable of what is happening. How can we change that kind of attitude in terms of how we use our money in business to make sure that it works out for the betterment of society?
Thank you, Tahir. Very, very powerful question as usual. And these are the challenges I'm talking about. So responses to these kind of questions are really important. Please go ahead, Zaire.
Thank you. I once had a burglary that I dealt with, and it was the first time I actually went to a CPF meeting, because this burglary now made me much more aware that I must now be involved in my community. But I wanted to ask the panelists, sometimes as business people, where can we access government forums as business people to give our ideas in a practical basis? So for example, let's say we have vagrants or people, poor people that need money, that are begging on the robot. Like, how can we engage with government as business people? Does the panelists, can you give us advice of how do we practically engage with government on a local level to give our input into matters affecting our localities? Yeah, that's.
Thank you, Zahir. Let's go to the panelists to respond to those questions.
Sorry, Faisal. I just want to pose the Musa question directly to the panelists also. So I think as Musa, we want to thank the panelists for giving up their weekend, their Sunday, and coming through and sharing and joining hands with us. But we'd like to look beyond the elections and beyond the vote. And we really feel that it's no use coming together just when it's election fever in the country and talk about what can be done. We would like to continue this conversation by bringing different groups together, and particularly business people who are more business activists and more inclined to assist us on this journey of transforming the South African society. So I'm posing a direct question of whether you would be keen to actually help us in Musa to get more business people like yourselves to join us to shift the thinking and mindset in the country from the idea of entitlement and tenders from government to entrepreneurship, to industrialists, and to looking at how value chains in the economy actually get set up. Because that requires a lot of work from business itself. And if that gets transformed, then the way we operate our economy in the country will also be transformed.
Thank you,
so
Karuna.
I think if they could comment on that and say how they feel about it and whether they're keen to join Musa in that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Karuna. In fact, I'm going to suggest that an answer and a response to the Karuna's question and the others also be your closing comment. So you all have 2 minutes for your closing comment.
So Faisal, my reminder, I can't put up my hand.
Yeah.
Can I go for it before the wrap up?
Okay.
Okay. It's been an exciting and interesting conversation. I want to pick, it's a very, very wide problem that we're dealing with if we're talking of the economy. In my mind, I just want to bring it down succinctly to 3 for each one of the panelists. I'll start with Donald. Donald, I fully understand. I've worked in your space where we've advised and grown the small entrepreneur from selling fruit and vegetables to multi-billion businesses today, some of them. And I have full experience with what you're going through. And just to pick on the VAT issue alone, how the VAT Act works against diminishing entrepreneurship. You've touched on it. You said that the minute the turnover increases, it has increased because you've got a wider supplier chain that you're now supporting. What happens? Suddenly your cost jumps up by 15%. If you're in the service industry, you realize you're being excluded now to compete with the attorneys and the others that provide services because you are 15% more expensive than them. So that's one issue. We need SARS on these kind of panels to realize what the real problems are and how they need to structure the tax system in order to benefit and uplift our society. I want to come to Alan. Very interesting. You also touch on issues that touch my heart when you talk of planning in business for failure. And I discovered at a very young age that you plan and you're budgeting. What do? We plan for success, but we don't do negative planning. That's what I used to call it. Planning for failure. The minute you have a mindset of embracing failure, you start planning for failure. And that protects your business against failure. So I think that's a very, very important point that you've raised. And then I'll play with the word and say there's shame and fame. What has happened with a lot of people, they just want to become famous very, very quickly in business. And it's not about, and I appreciate all the points that you've shared with us. To Mthunzi, you seem to be more, the type of guy that can influence government. Our economy is structured, Thabo Mbeki pointed this out some years ago. We've got a two-tier structure. Touch each major one. You've got private healthcare and you've got public healthcare. The NHI can't succeed because if it does, the private medical industry sees it as a danger. They may even collapse. If you go into the transport industry, the people are suffering because the people that voted for ANC, like the taxi industries and the unions, they look at the interest of the specific groups at the expense of the greater good of our society. So how do we change all these things? You come in the security industry. Police system can't work because private security must succeed. And we can go on in education and all the others, and you'll see how the economy is structured for the competition to eliminate the other rather than to embrace the other. So thank you. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Iqbal. Panelists, you have 90 seconds each. We're quite interested in what was said by all of you and some of the participants. I'm particularly looking at what the next steps would be. Problems have been mentioned, solutions have been mentioned. What would be the next steps in your views to take this forward so that there's greater participation by business, greater empowerment, more technology enablement, and so forth? Let's start with Alan.
So with me? Oh, Alan.
Was it me? Sorry.
Yeah, Alan, it's you.
Yes. Okay. So for me, I'm highly pragmatic, and just to Tahiru said, we fund parties. I don't fund anyone. I fund entrepreneurs. That's it. For me, the practical thing to do here is to do what Donald has done, what Mthunzi has done. What I do is just get on without government, despite government. Just get on with it. And as soon as you become successful, don't worry, government will find you because they'll want to cut some ribbon next to you and take the credit anyway. So they'll find you when you're successful and try and take the credit. So, but
thank you.
The thing is to get on with it and do it. And there are so many entrepreneurs right now who, despite everything we've spoken about, are just getting on with it and not complaining. Just they might complain, but they just get on with it. And that's all that we can do here is get on with it and then let them cut the ribbons next to us later.
Very powerful.
The point I made, are you willing to continue with us and have this conversation going forward and find some meaningful solutions of how we can transform the thinking in the country?
Karuna, to be practical, I'm happy to always be participating in the conversations, but for me, conversations, unless they lead to something practical, are conversations. I'm a doer. So if I need to see the connection between this and something. So that's what I need to, I will, as you know me, I participate in everything too, as long as I can see that it changes entrepreneurs' lives. So if I can see the connection, I'm in. If I can't see the connection, I'm out.
Thank you for that, Karuna.
Thanks.
So to that point, and what Alan's been suggesting and also communicating in his set of businesses that he's going through, there's a lot of connections and a lot of enablement opportunities and a lot of expertise. So I think we as Musa can get together and outline a way of putting into action what Alan's talking about and what our other panelists have suggested, and see how we can practically enable some of the ideas here. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Karuna. Donald, over to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me here today. I think to Alan's point, let's remove the glamour out of entrepreneurship. Let's really get down to business, and it's the business of working. I'm happy today because for 10 years, I haven't missed my rent. I haven't had to retrench anyone, and I haven't skipped anyone's salary. That for me is success. It's not in the car, it's not in the house. I don't want a Ferrari, I don't want a big mansion. If I get that, thank you. But if I make 50,000 Rand this year, more than I made last year, I'm equally happy too, so I'm not chasing the big things. So no, I'm not chasing the tender dream. I'm chasing my dream, and I've defined quite clearly what success looks to me. And I would encourage every other entrepreneur to define what success means for them. And it's not going to be a Ferrari. It might not even be a big house. Sometimes success means next year, I hope to be here. And in 10 years, I hope to be here. 20 years, I hope to be here. Thank you for having me here.
Fantastic, Donald. And that's really putting into practice what Alan mentioned, just doing it, making it happen. And that's really powerful. Wish you all the best, and I hope that you will partake with us, as Karuna has suggested as well. This is the beginning. We want to pursue this and take it to the next level with greater interaction with small business, micro business, medium business, and even the corporate sector. They have a corporate social investment program, a whole lot of things inclined towards equity and people, which we want to leverage. So this is going to grow, hopefully, and be a contributor to bringing into action and doing things together. Over to you, Mthunzi.
Yeah, let's see if I can do this in 90 minutes, because I made a few notes that I think I want to cover. 90 seconds, 90 seconds, sorry, 90 seconds. So Tahir, about we having people in office that are the worst amongst us, and using, let's see, the Minister of the Department of of Employment and Labor as the typical example. We need to change that kind of situation. We need to find a way for accountability, coming on platforms like this and being accountable. Zahir, when can we access government at the local level? Government never comes to us for design that is for relevance, for design that is meant for implementation, that is meant for pragmatists, because you've got incompetent people who are theoreticians who don't know what they don't know. They just don't know. They're incompetent. There's no meritocracy, right? So the only way to do this is to do it that way, by making sure that you change the government. I've made a note here. You talk about planning for failure as Alan was talking. You can't have innovation without planning for failure. It's not possible. You've got to be able to embed it in everything you do. And you say, I want to influence government. Actually, I want to replace government or be a big part of it. I think that's more practical for me. Power is taken, it's not given. We can't use, as I say, these theoreticians. We need practitioners, we need team players, we need leaders, we need meritocracy. Now, finally, as to the Musa question, for me, now that I've become a politician, you need to fund some of us. You've seen how the Oppenheimers have funded 89 million to 4 parties. Why? To preserve what is theirs. So if you guys want to also change things, you can't stand on the buy side and throw things inside and hope something is going to stick. You need to find a way of funding the change that you want. And lastly, to Karuna. Yes, Karuna, for me, I see, similar to what Alon said, I want to see doing. I want to see implementation. I want to see social justice in play. And one of the things I'm going to say to you, the South African Norwegian Association that I'm chairing was co-founded by me and a guy from Peter Maritzburg, who's married to a Norwegian in Kristianstad in Norway. Sanjay is his name. I'm happy to create a relationship between Musa and Sana immediately. I can just send, if you send me an email, you get Abu or somebody to send an email, I can introduce you. And we start looking at how we can work between Musa and Sana to make things happen. I don't know if that's 90 minutes. I've tried to go as fast, 90 seconds, as fast as I could.
Thanks, Mthunzi. Very, very important, and real practical action points as well there. So Karuna, Abu, let's pick up on that, connect with the Sanjay or the party from Norway, and pick up on some of the action items suggested by everyone. Karuna, I'd like to give you the last closing. We've actually run over by 5 minutes, so I'm not going to take any more questions. It's over to you, Karuna, for closing the session for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Friends, I think, you know, when you start discussing something simple as the economy and something very complex, you move from the local to the global. You look at all role players that are involved in it, and you're not going to have many solutions in place immediately. The one thing was we didn't want to have an election meeting that actually spoke to people about what different political parties were doing, because we all know that we have a very dysfunctional government right now. We know that the work of the private sector is an important piece of work. And if you don't have an enabling government, then you're not going to have the private sector do what it needs to do. So having said that, there is a big problem. And that big problem in our country is, how do we take our people with us? How do we transform the way people think, the way people practice, and the way people behave amongst each other? And I think the issues of how do we ensure that we have one integrated economy, one economy where everybody is included, each according to need, each according to ability in a way. So in that sense, this is what we're trying to do. In terms of the points that my friends from private sector are raising, Alon and I go back a long way in terms of his whole position of where he wants to get on with it. But I do think that there are things that we can work on together. One of the things is, if we want to actually put the message out to people in the communities that, you know, entrepreneurship is important, accountability is important, productivity is important, we're going to need to talk to other sectors of society. And one of the sectors is the faith sector, which we actually have a link with. And I think, you know, we could bring them in to actually help with that kind of messaging. They normally talk about praying to God, but we need to get them to be more involved in socio-economic justice. And so, you know, that part is something that we could practically be involved in, so that business people can be free to do what they do and what they do best. The other points are around this issue of ensuring that government intersects with businesses at the right points. And we could assist on lobbying for that kind of thing. Musa is a voluntary organization, and all of you are invited to join Musa as volunteers. You know, there's a space for everybody in Musa. We are not a big funding party, a funding organization. However, we do have linkages with some of the funders that do exist. And I think we could assist to ensure that when there is good work being done, that can be done. Some of the people who are here in Musa are actually business people who learn through experience. And so, you know, the idea of having mentoring in place, support in place, is something we could also be involved in. So with that, Faisal, I'd like to say thank you to everybody for attending the session. And we will be calling a dedicated session with the different sectors once more. In particular, we'd like to bring a fusion at some stage with business, youth, and the faith sector, so that we can have a good focus in place. Thank you.
That will be a powerful interaction, a collaboration across the different stakeholders in our communities across the country. Thank you all very much for your participation. That brings us to the end of the session. Thank you, Karuna. Thank you, the panelists, and thank you for all the participants, and also those who put comments on the chat. We will have this session recorded, pick up on the chats, and follow up with additional sessions after this. Keep in touch. You visit the musa.org.za website, connect with anyone you know in Musa, and let's try and collaborate further. There are other NGOs and other partners that we work with, and we will try and grow that because we want to bring together the silos to work in a more collaborative way. That's the intention of Musa. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.